be wondering what I'm doing here in the Fallon Theatre. It's simple. I'm visiting one of my oldest friends. Harry Croteau and I were at Bolton School in Lancashire in the north of England on scholarships at a very good day school for boys, and he went one way and I went another, but today we're both in Tallahassee, and he thought I should come down and make a few new friends, and that's what I've been doing today and tomorrow, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you. My first remark is perhaps a question to ask whether you can hear me without a microphone. It's a stupid question because, of course, if you can't hear me, you won't know whether I've answered. We'll take it on luck. I hate microphones when it comes to acting. It's an increasing desire of directors and producers and audiences too, I think, to absolutely make sure that actors can be heard, and they think the best way is to put a microphone on them. You'll see that I've got one, but that's just to record what I'm saying rather than to amplify it. The beauty of live theatre is that it is live and that the communication is instant. And if there's anything mechanical, technological, electrical getting in the way between me and you, then the communication, I think, is less easy to achieve. It's a very intimate thing, the voice and the ear. Because down here somewhere in the diaphragm, you have to take my word for it, there's a big muscle down here, which is the seat of the expression of our emotions. You know, when you cry, your sobs may emanate out, but they begin down here, and when someone's crying, you can see the diaphragm working, and equally when they're laughing too. And what happens when you produce your voice is that the diaphragm goes down to allow the lungs to expand, and then it comes up and the breath is pushed out of the lungs and up the windpipe through the larynx and across the most intimate parts of a person's body, really, the way we communicate, not just by speaking, but sometimes as part of lovemaking, over the tongue and the teeth and the lips and out across the air. And Sir Harry will tell you that the sound can be measured as it hits your eardrum, which then vibrates just as my diaphragm was vibrating, and at that moment we become actually physically connected, and any microphone that stops that intimacy, I think, is not a good idea. I'm a very lucky person in many ways, and as far as my career is concerned, totally lucky. Of course, you make your own luck. There's being in the right place at the right time is luck, but you have to be ready for luck when it happens, and I suppose those of you who are students here are preparing for that moment when luck will lead you to the right place and you can take advantage of it. And my luck began by going to the right school. It was the local school. It was the best place to go, but it was within walking distance of my home. And it was the sort of school where the head teacher thought that every boy's potential should be realized, and for him to act in the school play was at least as good as being in the second 11 soccer or cricket team, and to prove that, as well as the annual school play, there was a little miniature theatre in an Edwardian's house just along the road from the school, where at lunchtime and after school, and even at weekends sometimes, the boys would go to put on plays. And during my teen years, from the age of 12, 13 up to 18, I was down there the whole time putting on plays, little short one-act plays, some classics, some written by the boys, some in French, some in Latin, some in Greek, and they were presented to astounded and doting parents for a couple of performances. And so long before I'd ever had any notion that I might become a professional actor, I was an amateur actor. And so I have remained, because amateur, of course, involves love. And I love acting, and I love it so much because I need it so much. I began acting not because simply that I enjoyed showing off, not just a way of satisfying my ego, but rather following on from my introduction to the theatre, which had not been as an actor, but as an audience. And that was possible, and lucky too. In the north of England, there were great possibilities for theatre going. There were amateur companies at schools, at church, amateur companies in factories. There was the Bolton Little Theatre, which was an amateur theatre with its own premises that did 6 plays during the year, and I, as a young lad, went to see them. That's how I first saw Shakespeare. Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, and Macbeth, for starters. And before I went to university, I think I'd seen at least half of Shakespeare's plays. Not just done by amateurs, some of the greatest actors of my youth, John Gielgud, Laurence Olivier, Vivian Leigh, Charles Lawton, Paul Robeson, Sam Wanamaker, Peggy Ashcroft, and many others, going on tour through the big town of Manchester, which is close to where we live, and also at Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare was reputedly born in 1564. I discovered yesterday, just 1 year before St. Augustine was founded in Florida. So Florida and Shakespeare are exactly the same age. What did I enjoy about acting as a kid? I only realized much, much later that what I enjoyed about theatre was discovering the secret that the actors and other theatre practitioners had, which they shared and which you, the audience, could only guess at. And once you step into the wings, or get backstage, or in a dressing room, in a rehearsal room, you are in a world that is all for the audience's benefit, but it's a world that they don't know. And what was it about a secret that I enjoyed? It was because I had a secret, even at an age when I didn't really know I had, and that's because I was gay at a time when homosexuality was a word never used, when the concept of that sexuality was never discussed. It was when people were totally ignorant about it, and at home, and at church, and at school, the word was never mentioned. Indeed, the only sex education I was remembering yesterday was on my final day, when I was leaving, the headmaster called a little group of us into his office and said that he wanted to just say something to us about the world ahead, and that we would, no doubt, meet a certain sort of woman. All I say to you, said the headmaster, is be careful. Well, I've been so careful I've never met her. But if society burdens you with the responsibility of keeping secret something so central to your personality as your sexuality, you're living the life of a lie, and it's very difficult. And as I say, looking back, I think what attracted me to acting was that the stage was the one place where I could indulge the truth about myself, where I could play with my emotions and communicate them to strangers and friends and family, and be truly myself in a way that society didn't allow me to be when I was not on the stage. And after I left university, without going to drama school, and without coming to a marvelous institution like yours, I wanted to become a professional actor, in part because I'd heard that in the British theatre you could meet what in those days we used to call queers, and so it has proved, lots of them. I can't skip over the university I went to, which was Cambridge, Cambridge in England. I read English literature there. There is no drama faculties to this day in Cambridge, although many people whose names you know trained as actors there. They did it simply by, in their spare time, as I did, being in a lot of plays. Some of us wrote them, some directed, some stage managed, some presented, produced, directed, but I acted and was in 21 plays over the 3 years when I was pretending to get an English degree. We were very lucky, that word again, because national critics from national newspapers would come to Cambridge and review our productions. And after 3 years and 21 plays, I had a little collection of reviews from renowned critics, which I could present to my prospective professional employers in the British theatre. And we're now talking about 1961, when every town, every city in the United Kingdom had its own professional theatre. The tradition of, in Britain, of theatres being subsidised by the government is a relic from the time when royalty and aristocracy used to subsidise theatre companies of an earlier time. William Shakespeare was a member of the King's Men. The King was James I of England, whose courtiers, incidentally, used in private call him Queen James because he had a number of boyfriends. Not mentioned in our history classes at Bolton School. But all these towns have their own theatres, akin to this, perhaps not as large or as well fitted, but where groups of actors would stay under contract for a year at a time, and during that time, every 3 weeks, or every 2 weeks, and in some cases every week, put on a different play. And so over 3 years of being in repertory companies, I was in a number of plays and all sorts of entertainments, from revues, from musicals, from Agatha Christie, to standard classics of the British theatre, very old and more recent. And that was my training, that was my apprenticeship. And at the end of that 3 years, I found myself in Nottingham, in the north of England, where Midlands, where Robin Hood comes from. And I was working with the greatest director of that time, as far as Shakespeare is concerned, the Irishman Tyrone Guthrie, who could handle a group of actors like no other, care for each of them individually. The mark, I think, was not just a good employer, but a good director, and could also handle a crowd of actors on stage and place them to the greatest possible effect. And I was extremely lucky to be in a production of Coriolanus, or Coriolanus, pronounce it as you were, playing Tullus of Phidias. And I was seen doing that, not just by the national press, but by an employer who invited me to come down to London and be in my first play in the West End. And so those days, actors had to provide all their own costumes. If you were in a modern play, then the modern clothes would be your own. It was only if you had to wear a period costume that you could ask for help. I was required to wear a grey suit, and I had one still left from my school days, but the costume designer thought it was not good enough, inappropriate, and so I had to go to a shop and buy a suit. And I couldn't afford it, so the management of the company, the production, had to lend me the money, £45 it cost. My weekly salary at the time was £45 a week. If I'd been paid £40 a week, £5 less, according to the rules of my union, Actors' Equity, the management would have to have paid me rehearsal salary. So he bumped it up to 45, so he got the first 4 weeks of my employment for nothing. Now he lent me £45 for the suit. So he suggested that each week he would knock £5 off my salary as my payment. You now realise that I was now being paid £40 a week, but I still hadn't been paid for the rehearsal. Week by week, £5 was docked from my salary, and in the 9th week, when I finally completed the payment and would be on full salary the next week, the management took the play off, so I never got paid. And I mentioned that to the producer in question, who's still around in London, and he smiled and he said, well, it's always been my rule, Ian, that as long as I can get an actor for 1 penny less than he's actually worth, I'm happy. So that's producers for you. I hope if there are any of you training to be producers, that isn't quite your attitude. I think the better attitude would be to pay you at least 1 penny more than the actor's worth. And then what happened? Well, I don't know. It just rolled on. It was just once you're in London, you become, as you do when you're in New York, part of a family of theatre people. People you've admired from afar suddenly become acquaintances and colleagues and even friends. And I was in a series of plays in the West End, and one of which was seen by Maggie Smith, who later became a pal, and she introduced me to the great actor of my youth, Laurence Olivier. You may have seen in Wuthering Heights or in any number of not too good films, but of course his medium was the theatre, and he was running the new National Theatre of Great Britain on at the Old Vic Theatre. This was before the magnificent structure on the South Bank was built, and I stayed with him for just 9 months. When I realized that I wasn't going to get very far because I was in competition with other youngsters for the same sort of parts, and the other youngsters included Derek Jacobi, who I'd known at Cambridge, Anthony Hopkins, Michael Gambon, Robert Stevens, other actors who you may not know but who are extremely famous, and young women at the time, Maggie Smith and Joan Plowright and Lynn Redgrave, Billy Whitelaw, the great Samuel Beckett actress. This was a powerhouse of talent, and there was scarcely an actor, a leading actor of my generation today, who didn't pass through Laurence Olivier's company. And on it went, and I did touring theatre and began to play large parts, and did Shakespeare on the road, productions that toured to Europe and then came to London. So I played Richard II and Hamlet. And I didn't have a thought in my mind about doing television or films, and some of my friends did, and turned down jobs that I would do because they wanted to hold themselves open and free and ready for the big bucks and the fame and the glory of being in a movie or being on television. I don't know what it quite was about me me in what I felt was my natural medium of the theatre, and they thought that a theatre actor can't really cut it in front of the camera. And perhaps I shared their lack of confidence in that regard. I did do films each year. I've been in about 40 or 50 films, and you haven't seen most of them because, frankly, they weren't worth seeing. But it was very, very late in the day that I got films that would present me well and give people confidence that I could manage the camera as well as a live audience. And if you ask me, and I hope you will ask questions, all this is just an introduction to the moment when we actually communicate and share things. I can no longer say I prefer working on the stage to working in front of a camera. They're different, although they are so close to being the same that the difference is not what's important. When you're preparing for a part, whether you're trying to get inside the character or put the character inside yourself, I don't really know. It's like when you hear a wonderful pianist. Is he taking the music out of the piano, or is he putting it in? He's doing both, really. But whether you're preparing for a part in front of a camera or a part in front of a live audience, you have to go through the same process. What makes it easier about theatre is that you actually get rehearsal time to experiment, to explore with your colleagues. And what's baffling to me still about films is that the convention is that there is no preparation. There is no rehearsal. So the work has to be done on your own and in the moment. And that, I think, perhaps what separates out film from theatre is that in film, if you are not doing it as the camera turns, you've missed your chance. You have to be the character the minute action is called. And so it's much more a sense of improvisation. However much preparation you've done, you have to live in the moment. Whereas in the theatre, because you have an added responsibility that isn't expected of you in film, you have to project your performance. You have to exaggerate your voice, and exaggerating your voice and reaching back. Oh, hello, you suddenly find you're using elements of your body which would be inappropriate when you're doing a close-up in cinema. That means that the preparation of rehearsal is crucial, and that a very high percentage of your concentration as a theatre actor is not just on being the character, but in presenting the character. And that perhaps is the crucial difference. And it depends how I'm feeling, whether I'm happier today to be in a play or in a film. I do find these days that I'm beginning to think that theatre acting is for young people. It needs energy, physical energy, of course, vocal energy, mental energy, emotional energy, and you need less of all those things when you're in front of the camera. So, as you're young, take advantage of your natural youthful energy and make sure you get on a stage. Don't please leave this place and pray for the television series which is going to keep you from the stage for the rest of your life. Any actor will tell you who's been in all the media that this is where you learn your job, and this is the most satisfying as it happens. Telling the story right the way through in front of a group of strangers who by the end of the evening have become your friends. cinema, you're in a studio, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're doing your close-up, perhaps leading to the other actor because he's gone home to prepare for tomorrow's work. You're doing it for an anonymous colleague who's reading his part from the script, and the whole thrill and excitement and enjoyment of direct communication is not part of film. Well, that sort of brings us up to date, doesn't it? If anyone wants to just shout out a bit, something that we might talk about and ask a question, and I see somebody there, so good and loud.
Hi.
Hello.
You said earlier that you would present plays abroad in around Europe. What does that feel like presenting an English speaking play in a non-English speaking country, or would you perform in French or German?
Well, I don't much enjoy it, to tell you the truth. The last big tour I did was as King Lear. We did do it in 3 cities here, in Brooklyn and Minneapolis and Los Angeles. I'm sorry we didn't get down to Florida. But it was a great relief to come to America where we have a shared language, particularly with Shakespeare. The middle class was doing some work today on the sonnets and realizing that the delicacy and subtlety and complication of Shakespeare's verse and language is of the essence, and that people who come to see Shakespeare in the theatre principally come to hear him. That's why you're called an audience. Audio, spectators go to football matches and viewers stay at home and watch television, but audiences want to hear. And if what they're hearing is something they're having to filter through their own simultaneous translation, or worse still, through somebody else's instantaneous translation in their earpiece, that barrier between direct communication that I began by talking about is present again. However, there is a thrill, of course, in taking what you know well and love to people who are prepared to share it with you. And of course, around the world for Shakespeare, there are multitudes of people who know the plays extremely well, whether they know the English language well, and want to hear the way British actors are doing it. So, but it's not easy, and it's not always enjoyable. I was doing Richard III in Tokyo at the Globe Theatre in Tokyo, and rather alarmingly, I came out confidently as King Richard, who begins the play by speaking directly to the audience. Now is the winter, and it seemed to me I was talking to a totally empty house. I hope this is not disrespectful to Japanese people, but they're rather small, and I couldn't see they're vanished. But more baffling than that, they were absolutely quiet, which again gave me the impression that I was on my own. Baffling, because the previous day I'd been to see the Kabuki Theatre in Japan, which is an all-day affair. Audiences take their families and they take sandwiches because they're going to be in there at 11 in the morning until the middle of the evening as these wonderful old stories roll on, performed with enormous panache by actors in special exaggerated makeup and wigs and wonderful The same when they leave the stage. And so an actor would go off and say his last line. And then the crowd would shout the Japanese version of God bless you, Ian McKellen, may your house live forever! Richard III, there doesn't seem to be anybody there. There was one moment in a soliloquy when, having wooed Lady Anne very successfully, Richard had slipped off his jacket and opened his breast and invited her to stab him with his own sword. And after she'd gone and Richard had won her hand, he hoped, he put his sword away. And in our production, I did up my shirt with the one hand because my Richard only had one hand that was of any use to him. And then managed to put on my greatcoat with one hand and slip it over my bad hand, talking all the while. And then I picked up my coat, and then the pièce de résistance, then my hat, and then the pièce de résistance was I put on a leather glove, which I worked out happily one day. I could just do that, and it fell onto my hand.
Oh, that's cool.
British audiences loved that, and as I went off, I would salute them and leave the stage, and there would be a snatching of applause. Well, nothing from there. But then I remembered the kabuki actors, and on the second performance, I put on the coat, and I put on the hat, and I put on the glove, and I took that intake of breath, which had been so successful with the kabuki actors. And God bless you, England!
Well, you did hundreds of plays through your youth, through university. You became a professional at 22 and less than years later. When did you feel you would hit the point of no return, where you do nothing else? You were an actor for life.
When I told my father, who was a civil engineer, that I wanted to carry on acting, but now professionally, he said, well, why don't you give it 2 years, to see how it goes. And I was happy about that. Well, the 2 years passed, and then the 3rd year and the 4th year, and I've never looked back, and there's never been a moment when I lost any confidence that I'd made the right decision. But luck again, I've never been out of work when I wanted to. There's always been a job there. I've always been looking for the next job. That answers the question. But this luck of never being out of work, which I felt was part of the way I would approach acting. I've never, I think, done a job that I didn't want to do. I've never done a job just for money. I've often done jobs to work with specific people, or to do something different. If a part comes my way that I feel I've already played in another situation, I'm not really very interested in it. And the only bad thing about playing Gandalf is that you get all sorts of very, 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 very old men in scripts. I was asked to play God the other day, and they don't come over to
So awesome.
So, I suppose what does separate me and other actors that I know is that I'm not just doing this job. I'm having a career. It's what I admire about Laurence Olivier and many other actors since him. the many parts they play, and which allows you to forgive them if sometimes they disappoint you, because you're seeing it in the context. And I've always hoped that was true about my own acting, that it was an ongoing process. And no, there's never yet been a moment when I thought, no, I'll go and do something sensible or something. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It's a huge honor. I read in an interview with you recently that you're looking forward to playing Gandalf the Grey again. Do you prefer that character to Gandalf the White? I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes.
The questions about Lord of the Rings, a play, no, sorry, not a play at all. It's a novel by J.R.R. Tolkien, or as a young friend of mine called him, J.R.R. Tolkien. And at the beginning of that story, Gandalf, I think 7,000 years old, is it, or more, is Gandalf the Grey, the wizard who gets down and dirty with the hobbits, who likes...
Oh my God.
Where do you people come from? He lives by his wits, you know, and he likes Hobbiton because there's drink there. He likes a smoke. He likes a good party. He likes a good chat. He likes the animals. He loves the countryside. That's where he's happiest. Of course, the mind is whirling away. But when he is resurrected halfway through the story as Gandalf the White, he's a man on a particular mission, and all that human side of the wizard seems to have dropped away, and he becomes a single-minded commander. And I just find he was less fun to play because he was less complicated. But I'm happy that in the scripts that I've seen of The Hobbit, which is the play that precedes Lord of the Rings, Gandalf the Grey is back, and exclusively as himself. So it's also a very good part because, as Peter Jackson, the director who's helped to write the new script, said, it was such fun writing for the actor who they knew was going to play Gandalf. And so I'd always felt